You might have heard that Python is an object-oriented programming language. That sentence speaks to how we separate elements of our code. In previous videos, I spoke about how functions are comparable to actions in real life. In Python, objects are comparable to things. So far, we've worked with the built-in classes of objects like strings, integers, lists, and others. We can also create our own class of objects. The way to do that is with the keyword class. Convention is to capitalize the name of the class. And pass keyword only tells Python that we're going to leave this blank for now, but please don't raise an error. This is not a mistake. Now that we have defined our person class, let's create a couple of person objects. Just like the number pi is an instance of a float, person2 and person3 are instances of this new person class that I have created here. From this, you can understand that the job of a class is simply to allow the creation of objects. If I had not defined this person class here on the top, we would not be able to create these two objects down below. It works like a blueprint in that sense. Now let's start adding everything that our class will have and what actions they will do. And by that, I mean the class's attributes and methods. The first thing to be added to all of our classes is the init method. This is short for initialization, and it will tell Python that whenever we create an object, starting from this class, this is how it should look like when it's initialized. This method will be called every time an object from this class is started. Now that I have set up these two attributes here, name and age, I have to update these two objects that I'm creating, otherwise they're going to raise an error. When I try to run this program and run the code like this, you can see that person2 and it stops at person2 because it raises an error then. It's missing two required positional arguments, name and age. So let me quickly write here. And if I run this again, now you can see that person3 is raising an error because person2 does not raise an error. So I will just include a name here and an age. We can access and update a field in our objects with a dot like this. Do not capitalize field names and separate multiple words with underscores, like if you are creating a first name field instead of a name field. You would separate them with an underscore. If you were to add a new attribute to this person2 object, like gender for example, let me display what happens. If I try to print the gender of person3, there's this error, person object does not have the attribute gender. However, if I print the gender of person2, you can see here that the gender was created. So this gender female is only being created in this particular object and not in all objects of the person class. Which brings me to explaining this self keyword here that you can see that I kind of brushed over. When we create person2, the self keyword that you can see here on the top ensures that we're referring only to person2 and not all objects of the person class. It's a way that when we make a change to one person object like here, we don't change all person objects. Another way of looking at this is going the property name in that one object, the self object, will have a value that the user provides. If you simply leave out the self keyword, Python will understand that person2 and person3 do not have name and age because they are objects, and those variables here would be referring only to the class. So if I do like this and I try to print out person2's name, for example, well, let me do that here just because it's easier. Sorry, I run this twice, but you can see here this error, person object does not have attribute name. because these are objects. However, the class person does have name and age. So just to give you some more explanation on what's going on here, you can see here that when each object is going to be initialized, the parameters of this initialized method are going to be name and age. Self is a parameter that is kind of a given. We're not going to add it here. You can see we're only passing 2 parameters when we initialize a new object. So just to dive a little bit deeper here, into these initialized method, the init method. This is written with double underscores in the beginning and at the end of the word init, and we're gonna pass in always the self parameter. In this case, the object person, I wanted to add name and age. We can add as many parameters as we want. Here we are saying that the property name of the self object, meaning this represents each object. So for example, in person 2, this self would represent person 2. In person 3, the self here means person 3. So the name of person 2, the name of person 3 is going to be passed by the user as the parameter, as I am passing it here. As a parameter of this person object, I'm passing Anna as the name, and then it's going to be assigned to this name variable of person 2 in this case. This is a bit tricky. This was a bit tough for me to learn, so I hope I've managed to make it a bit simpler for you. But just to explain this a bit further, I could name these 2 variables anything I wanted, like full name. These words in the self category are attributes of each object, and these keywords, these variable names are my choice. They don't need to be the same on either side of the equation. I'm just choosing to make them so it's simpler. Another good practice is for you to include docstrings. Docstrings are simply documentation about what your class or your methods does. This is a good practice because in the future, other developers might want to use your code, so this will give them a heads up as to what they should be doing or what they can expect your code to do. Now, you would probably want to make this as descriptive as possible, but because I'm just making up some bogus class here for the sake of teaching you, there's not really much to go over. When you execute the help function on this person object now, you can see here that the docstring that we just created, that we just typed, is going to show here. Now we're able to see that this class creates a person object. You should give it a try and use this help function into other classes, even the built-in classes, to see what methods they have, because you can see here that as the methods, I've only created the init method so far. Now let's create another method inside this class person, and pay attention to the indentation since this is important to Python. If I define the method out here, let me just name this days2. This new method that I'm writing here would be outside of this class, of this person class. Because I want it to be inside, I need to make it at the same indentation as the init method. And here I'm just going to type out what this class does, and it returns how many certain days a user has been alive. And again, I'm just writing some easy method for you to follow along to showcase the creation of methods. So I'm just gonna do the self age, turn it to an integer, and times the 365 for how many days in a year there are. So what this method is gonna do is gonna take the age of that person object, and it's gonna return that times 365, which are for sure the number of days that that person has been alive. Just gonna go ahead and create person 2 again. And then I'm gonna run the person 2 method. Now there's some debugging to be done. Oh, there we go. Sorry. So as you can see now, it's being print 20 times 365, and we get here 7300. Okay guys, so I thought I'd showcase the creation of a class in one pretty big repository. So I went into GitHub, which is probably the biggest website nowadays for storing code. If you don't know about GitHub, you should definitely check it out. You're going to need it in your programming journey. And then I went into the Google profile, and Google has many different repositories. Usually companies as well as people will separate different types of code for different purposes in different repositories. A repository is just like a folder in that sense. So I dug in a little bit. I found this Google API Python client, and I just wanted to showcase, so far we've been seeing a lot of different concepts, and I thought I'd take you through, something that might seem a bit scary, but to show you that if you follow this series so far, you would at least understand the flow of the code and what each thing in this code is trying to accomplish. So for example, on the top of the code, as always, we have the imports. We talked about it in one of the previous videos. Then down here, it's creating a variable called decorator, and it's assigning all of this. It's storing all of this inside its decorator. I don't know what that does. I don't think anybody who's not working in this needs to know that specifically. We can see that there are three things separated, three comma separated values. Then here we are assigning to the service variable something else. Down here, we're creating the class main handler. As we learned today, we're passing as a parameter this web app, the request handler of this web app. Usually, the dot denotes that this is a property of this. It could also be a method, like we're gonna see down here. But then we're creating this class, right? First thing, we are defining the render response method. This does not have an init method. It doesn't always have to have an init method, but as beginners, I'd say 99% of the times we're gonna have an init method. So just go with it if you're not sure what to do. Then we're creating this render response method. It's gonna have the self parameter, meaning for each object of this main handler class, do something differently. There are two parameters here, template and context. And then as we follow along, we assign renderer. We create this variable renderer, assign it to something. Same thing down here, rendered value. And what this method does essentially creates the two variables, and then I execute this write with the rendered value as a parameter. Again, we don't need to know exactly everything that is going on here. I just wanted to showcase that with some basic knowledge, we can understand the flow of this code. Even if it's something that Google, as big as it is, was working on, we can kind of grasp, the sequence of events, not necessarily what they're trying to accomplish here, but, the creation of a class, the creation of a method, the parameters, etc. Then we're creating another method here. This is a decorator. We haven't gone over them. Actually, I don't think we're going to talk about this in the series. It's not an advanced concept, but for beginners, it's not going to be very frequent that we're going to use decorators. So feel free to check it out on your own time. It's definitely worthwhile. You're going to see it, but usually in more advanced code. Then we can see here that there's some logic. If this decorator has credentials, meaning most likely either this is not false or this is not a 0. If that is the case, then execute this block, assign to the variable tasks something, do a loop for all the tasks. And then if this value is actually false, then do this. Then it creates a third method, and down here you can see that the class that we created is being used as a parameter inside this application variable. And that's basically it. So everything here is being created and imported. You can see that down here we're essentially using what we created, and that's basically most of the times it's going to be the flow of the code. We're going to create everything, we're going to import everything, and then the actual execution of the program comes at the very bottom, simply because Python is a language, as I've spoken multiple times, top to bottom. That's how the code is read. This is kind of an outdated repository. The last commit, as you can see here, 2016, but I just thought it would be nice to show you that, you know, something as advanced as Google can have some logic that we, you know, are slowly becoming familiar with. So I hope you enjoyed this. It was a bit different than what I usually do at the end of the videos, but yeah. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. If you guys have any feedback, please leave it in the comments. Cheers.